Sophia Worringer, political commentator and Deputy Political Director at the Centre for Social Justice, is with us. Good morning, Sophia.
Good morning, James.
Let's begin with a story in the front of the Times. The International Investment Summit today being held in London by the government. Big money says time is right to buy into Britain, is the headline on the front of the Times. Is this going to change the government's fortunes? They're clearly hoping this can change the narrative, given the rocky start that Keir Starmer has had.
They definitely will be hoping that. Whether it's enough, it will be something that needs to unfold. And I think the problem is there's a slight contradiction in how they've been talking about Britain's fortunes over the last 3 months. It's been very much talking about the damning, or what they call the damning kind of record inherited by the previous government of the Conservatives. And they're painting this picture, trying to, at the same time, paint this picture of kind of sunny uplands of future hope and investment that they hope will come. So there's slight contradiction in terms there. But I think it's absolutely crucial that they get this relationship with business right. But at the same time, obviously, things like the Employment Rights Bill and these rumours about the increase in national insurance for employers means that this is a very tightrope to walk. And I think there's still a lot more to be done to ensure that we get the growth that they've staked their government on.
And then also, I mean, it's interesting this morning, there's a great comment piece in the Times by Libby Purvis under the headline, Rash Hague must wise up to the real world. And this obviously follows the controversy over the Transport Secretary Louise Haig's comments about P&O ferries, and that for a time was thought to have jeopardised £1 billion worth of investment by P&O's parent company, DP World. You know, does that controversy expose maybe a bit of naivety on the part of some new ministers in the government?
I think it does, and I think it also exposes this idea that is unfortunately seeping through some of the ministers, is that kind of business is inherently bad or exploitative, and they're there to be milked for tax purposes rather than be partnered with. That's not something, of course, the government would say outright, but I think some of the perspectives of the ministers means that view is seeping through in their comments. I mean, I think Louise Haig, in some ways, was right in that P&O did break the law at the time, but that is not a conversation you have in public by making comments. That is a conversation you have behind the scenes when you're trying to get £1 billion of investment in the port. And I do think, obviously, the government have distanced themselves from her comments, so it's not something they support. They've kind of put her out on her own, really, to make that comment. But I do think they need to get better at the politics and the communication of what they believe.
Well, one of the things that'd be interesting to see what business makes of is this suggestion that the government is planning to increase national insurance contributions for employers. Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, was doing the media round yesterday. He appeared on Times Radio and didn't deny suggestions that national insurance contributions for employers could go up. Obviously, Labour said during the election campaign they would not increase income tax or national insurance contributions, or I think VAT was the other one. He's now kind of saying, well, when we said that, we meant national insurance contributions for workers, not employers. What do you make of this, Sophia? Would that be, you know, if the government are determined they've got to raise revenue from somewhere, is that a sensible thing to look at?
I don't think it is the answer. I think they're trying to frame it as working people versus business, and that business has the broad shoulders to take on additional taxes, and whilst working people don't. Unfortunately, they forget that working people are employed by businesses. And when you have the increase in regulation being brought through with the Employers' Rights Bill, many of which are positive, but are just going to add more burdens to employers in terms of what they have to deliver and what's expected of them, obviously therefore eating into their profit margins and making them nervous about hiring. We've already heard businesses saying that they will not be hiring until after the budget. They're going to freeze their hiring, or they're worried about what that impact might be. When you have that in addition to an increase in tax potentially in the employer's contribution to national insurance, it makes it a very difficult environment for businesses. And yet the government have staked their whole narrative on getting growth for the economy. So they really need businesses to thrive, to do well, to bring in more revenue for the country if they're going to achieve their aims. So this tension is going to be worked out over the next few months.
I mean, I suppose the argument in favour of doing it would be it could potentially raise a substantial amount of money. A 1 percentage point increase in national insurance contributions by employers would raise £8.9 billion a year. Another choice would be levying national insurance on employers' pension contributions, which are exempt at present. That could generate up to £18 billion a year. I mean, this is the problem the government have, is they made such a big thing of, well, we're not going to increase the big headline taxes during the election campaign. Now they're in power. Now they say the financial picture is bleaker than they expected. Whether you believe that or not is another question. If they want to raise money, they're going to have to find it somewhere.
They are going to have to find it somewhere. But then they also might just kick the can down the road. So if they are talking about tapping into pensions and making that more difficult, we have a huge problem already with people not having enough saved into their pensions, and therefore the cost that will be to the state when people retire in terms of pension credit and other welfare support will be huge. So it's something that is not an easy decision. I think that the government are waking up now to understanding how difficult it is to be the party of government rather than to be slinging stones from the outside in opposition. And they've said, however, that they don't want to do big, spending plans straight away. So it's asking, what is this money that they are desperate to raise going to go into?
Now, Sophia, do you care about what they're calling Taylorgate, which is Taylor Swift being given a VVIP police escort to her gigs at Wembley recently? The latest line is that apparently the Attorney General pressured the Met to provide such an escort. Now, it's worth saying the Attorney General was not one of those ministers who had free tickets to go and see Taylor Swift. But is this a bit of a kind of low-level scandal, or is this a fuss about nothing?
I don't think it's a great precedent. I wouldn't call it a scandal. I was also at the Taylor Swift tickets, although I paid for my I paid for my own tickets.
Probably a pretty penny for them as well.
I was there. You're right. He wasn't the Attorney General, Lord Hermer, to receive free tickets himself, but a lot of the now cabinet did. However, I don't think that was what swayed them either way. I don't think a promise of a free night at Taylor Swift concert, however great it was, would have swayed their judgment. But it just doesn't look good. And I think that's the problem when you have coming on the back of other so-called sleaze accusations about accepting other freebies with kind of more severe consequences about kind of cash for access, as it were. This is just adding to that feeling that they are open to be persuaded if the right freebies come their way. I think the problem here is that the manager of Taylor Swift, who is also her mum, had supposedly said that they would pull the show following the Vienna security concerns where there was a foiled terrorist attack in Austria. So I guess they felt they had the responsibility in some ways to ensure that this huge economic boost, up to £1 billion of boost money into the economy brought in by the Eras tour to the UK, they had felt like they had the responsibility to make it go ahead. But the problem in my mind is the precedent of what it sets for other so-called VVIPs, and obviously what it means for Prince Harry, who has been told by the Metropolitan Police, and quite rightly, I think, that the Metropolitan Police are not for hire, as it were, and that they cannot cover his security concerns if he's not a working royal. So I think it's about the precedent it sets for future, rather than actually the kind of so-called sleaze accusations in the Labour Party. Yeah,
that's a really good thought. Penny for Prince Harry's view on Taylor Swift getting a VVIP escort. Just briefly, Sophia, Daily Mail this morning says that M&S is going to start stocking white mulled wine. Do you like the idea of white mulled? I mean, I hate mulled wine generally, but would you drink white mulled wine?
I think I would, definitely. I'm very intrigued by this. Sounds good. I do think that M&S are very good at pushing the boat out on new Christmas traditions. Look forward to seeing how well this goes down. I think people at Christmas are open to drinking all sorts of alcohol, so why not add in another type with white wine?
Do you not think, though? I mean, when I go to a Christmas party and someone presents me with this hot, steaming, smelly... I like wine, don't get me wrong, but just give me a normal glass of wine. I know I'm in the minority here, but I've never understood the appeal of mulled wine, but clearly you quite like it.
I think some of it is the nostalgia and the feeling of holding something warm and it's cold outside and you have it at a Christmas market and it's the feeling. I agree. Sometimes it can be, the taste is not the most kind of appealing. It can be quite sickly. But I think people like that connotation of having something a bit over the top at Christmas. And I think, as you said, white wine will maybe less sickly, maybe less strong. So I think that's why potentially it's got legs to go quite far.
Maybe I'll give it a go. Sophia, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jade.
Sophia Worringer there, political commentator and Deputy Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice.